A homeless poor girl sleeps on her suitcase, and the millionaire CEO falls in love at first sight. In the heart of downtown Seattle, where steel towers pierce the morning mist and power suits stride past human shadows, a single moment would shatter two worlds, when the city's most ruthless CEO glimpsed an angel sleeping on a red suitcase, and his billion-dollar empire suddenly meant nothing at all. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The rain had stopped, but the concrete still wept. Amora pressed her cheek against the worn leather of her red suitcase, feeling the morning chill seep through her thin jacket. The sidewalk outside Pinnacle Financial Tower was unforgiving, cold, hard, and indifferent to the young woman who had made it her bed for the third night running. Her dark skin, usually radiant despite her circumstances, looked ashen in the gray Seattle dawn. She pulled her knees closer to her chest, the denim of her jeans rough against her palms. Every muscle in her 24-year-old body ached from sleeping on concrete, but it was the ache in her chest that hurt more, the hollow feeling that came from having nowhere else to go. What would you do if you lost everything overnight? Share your thoughts below. 3 months ago, she'd been Amora Johnson, nursing student with dreams bigger than the small apartment she shared with her grandmother. Now she was just another invisible soul in a city that moved too fast to notice the broken. The eviction notice was still folded in her back pocket, the paper soft from being handled too many times. Failure to pay rent. 30 days to vacate. Those words had ended her world as surely as her grandmother's funeral had ended her heart. Move along, miss. Amora's eyes fluttered open to see polished black shoes beside her face. A security guard stood over her, his expression somewhere between annoyed and bored. She'd seen him before, made the mistake of thinking his nod yesterday meant acceptance. "I'm not causing any trouble," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold. "You're loitering. This is private property." Private property. As if the sidewalk belonged to the glass tower that scraped the sky above them. As if she wasn't human enough to deserve 6 feet of concrete to rest her weary bones. Amora sat up slowly, her world tilting slightly from exhaustion. She gathered her few possessions, a worn backpack, a water bottle, and the red suitcase that held everything she had left of home. Her grandmother's quilts, a few photographs, her nursing textbooks that she couldn't bear to sell. Where am I supposed to go? The question slipped out before she could stop it. The guard's face softened for just a moment. "There's a shelter on Pine Street. Opens at 7. She nodded, though they both knew the shelter had a 3-day limit and she'd already used her allotment this month. Standing, she shouldered her backpack and lifted the suitcase, its wheels long since broken. As she walked away, she heard the guard mutter, "Damn shame." 4 to 7 floors above the street, Jackson Pierce stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the city wake up. At 36, he commanded an empire worth $3 billion, but this morning he felt the weight of every penny. The Wall Street Journal lay open on his mahogany desk, his picture on the front page beneath the headline, "Pierce Financial Weathers Another Storm." The storm in question was a hostile takeover attempt that had cost him sleep for 6 weeks straight. He'd won, of course. He always won. But victory felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. Jackson adjusted his charcoal suit jacket, the Italian wool worth more than most people made in a month. His reflection in the window showed a man who looked older than his years, sharp jawline set in permanent tension, blue eyes that had forgotten how to soften, blonde hair perfectly styled to hide the fact that he'd been running his hands through it all night. His phone buzzed. Another congratulatory message from another business associate who only cared about Jackson's money. He set it aside without reading. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his entire adult life building walls, financial, emotional, physical. His penthouse apartment was a fortress 30 floors above the masses. His office was a shrine to success, isolated from the real world by thick glass and thicker bank accounts. He'd told himself it was necessary. After his parents died in that car crash when he was 22, after his fiancée left him for someone who had time for a relationship, after his business partner betrayed him and tried to steal his company, he'd learned that trust was a liability he couldn't afford. Now he had everything money could buy and nothing money couldn't. Jackson's assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Pierce, the board meeting is in 10 minutes. "Cancel it," he said without turning around. "Sir." "Cancel the meeting, Rebecca. Move everything to tomorrow." There was a pause. In 15 years of working for him, Rebecca had never heard him cancel a board meeting. "Is everything all right?" Jackson pressed his palm against the cool glass. Down below, the city moved in its predictable patterns. Cars flowing like blood through concrete arteries, people scurrying like ants with their urgent, meaningless errands. "I need to get out of here," he said quietly. It wasn't like him to be impulsive. Every decision in Jackson's life was calculated, measured, profitable. But something about this morning felt different. Maybe it was winning another battle in a war that never seemed to end. Maybe it was the empty bottle of whiskey in his desk drawer that hadn't helped him sleep. Or maybe it was the dream he'd been having, the same dream for months now. A little girl with his eyes calling for her daddy, reaching for him across a chasm he couldn't cross. Jackson grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. He needed air. He needed to walk. He needed to remember what the world felt like when you weren't looking down at it from 47 floors up. The elevator descended, carrying him from his crystal tower toward the messy, unpredictable reality of street level. He had no idea that in 5 minutes, his perfectly ordered world would shatter completely. He had no idea that an angel was waiting for him on the corner, sleeping on a red suitcase, about to change everything he thought he knew about love. The Seattle morning air hit Jackson's face like a baptism as he stepped out of Pinnacle Financial Tower. For the first time in months, he wasn't rushing toward a destination with military precision. Instead, he let his feet carry him wherever they wanted to go, his Italian leather shoes clicking against wet pavement in no particular rhythm. The city looked different from ground level. Up in his tower, Seattle was a chessboard where he moved pieces with calculated precision. Down here, it was chaos, honking cars, chattering pedestrians, the smell of coffee and exhaust, and something indefinably human. He turned left onto Pine Street, then right onto 2nd Avenue, walking with no purpose except to walk. The weight in his chest, that constant pressure that came from carrying the responsibility of $3 billion and 3,000 employees, began to ease slightly. A homeless man sat outside a coffee shop, his cardboard sign reading "Veteran. Anything helps." Jackson's first instinct was to look away, to cross the street, to maintain the bubble of separation his wealth had created. But something made him stop. He pulled out his wallet and placed a $100 bill in the man's cup. "God bless you, sir," the veteran said, his eyes wide with surprise. Jackson nodded and kept walking, unsettled by the gratitude in the man's voice. When was the last time someone had thanked him for something that wasn't a business transaction? 2 blocks later, he saw her. At first, she was just another figure huddled on the sidewalk, the kind of scene his eyes had been trained to skip over, the way the wealthy learned to edit out inconvenient truths. But something made him look again. Maybe it was the splash of red from her suitcase against the gray concrete. Maybe it was the way the morning light caught the curve of her cheek. Or maybe it was the fact that she looked like she was sleeping, and something about her stillness in the midst of the city's chaos made his heart stop. Amora was curled on her side, using her backpack as a pillow, her arm draped protectively over the red suitcase. Her dark hair fell across her face in soft waves, and even in sleep, there was something beautiful about her, not the polished, maintained beauty of the women in his social circle, but something raw and real and utterly captivating. Jackson found himself slowing, then stopping completely. He stood there on the sidewalk, people flowing around him like water around a stone, and stared at this girl who had somehow managed to find peace in the most unlikely place. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with skin the color of warm coffee and lips that even in sleep seemed to hold secrets. Her clothes were clean but worn, carefully maintained despite her circumstances. There was dignity in the way she slept, a quiet strength that spoke of someone who refused to be broken even when the world had tried its best. Have you ever seen someone and instantly known they would change your life? Tell us about that moment. Jackson had built his fortune on quick decisions, on the ability to see value where others saw risk. But this wasn't about money or business or profit margins. This was about something he'd forgotten existed, the simple, powerful recognition of one soul calling to another. She stirred slightly, a small frown crossing her face as if she was fighting something in her dreams. Her hand tightened on the suitcase handle, and Jackson found himself wondering what was inside. What did someone carry when they had lost everything else? Sir, are you all right? Jackson turned to find a woman in scrubs looking at him with concern. A nurse, probably heading to or from Swedish Medical Center. He realized he'd been standing there for several minutes, just watching Amora sleep. "I'm fine," he said, though he wasn't sure that was true. Nothing about this moment felt fine. Everything about it felt like his life was tilting on its axis. "That's Amora," the nurse said softly, following his gaze. "She's been sleeping here for a few days. Sweet girl. She used to be in the nursing program at UW before." She trailed off, obviously feeling she'd said too much. "Before what?" Jackson asked, surprised by how much he wanted to know. The nurse hesitated. "Before life got in the way, I suppose. It happens to the best of us." She walked away, leaving Jackson alone with his thoughts and the sleeping girl who had somehow reached into his chest and rearranged everything inside. Amora. Her name was Amora. He stood there as the morning rush began in earnest, as suits and ties and important people with important places to be flowed past them both. A few dropped coins into the coffee cup someone had placed near her suitcase. Most pretended not to see her at all. But Jackson couldn't look away. There was something about her face that tugged at memories he'd buried, not specific memories, but feelings. The way his mother used to look when she was reading in the garden. The peace he'd felt as a child, before the world taught him that peace was a luxury he couldn't afford. This girl, Amora, slept like someone who still believed in goodness despite evidence to the contrary. She slept like someone who hadn't let the world convince her that hope was foolish. Jackson found himself kneeling beside her, careful not to wake her. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched in the fine lines around her eyes, the way her lips were slightly chapped from sleeping outside. Her jacket was thin, not nearly warm enough for Seattle's unpredictable weather. Without thinking, he shrugged out of his coat and laid it gently over her. The cashmere was worth more than most people made in a week, but that didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the fact that she was cold and he could help. Amora's eyes fluttered open at the touch of warmth. For a moment, she looked confused, disoriented. Then her gaze focused on Jackson, and he found himself drowning in eyes that were deep brown with flecks of gold, eyes that held pain and strength and a vulnerability that made his throat tight. "I'm sorry," she whispered, starting to sit up. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," Jackson said quickly. "Please." She looked at the coat covering her, then back at his face. He was still kneeling beside her on the dirty sidewalk in his $1,000 suit, and he realized how strange this must look. A CEO of a Fortune 500 company crouched beside a homeless girl like he was praying at an altar. Maybe he was. "Your coat," Amora said softly. "It's too expensive. I might ruin it." The fact that she was worried about his coat, when she had nothing, when she was sleeping on concrete, did something to Jackson's heart that felt like breaking and healing at the same time. "It's just a coat," he said, though they both knew it wasn't. Nothing about this moment was just anything. Amora sat up fully, careful to keep his coat around her shoulders. This close, Jackson could smell her shampoo, something floral and cheap and infinitely more appealing than the designer perfumes he was used to. She looked at him with those impossibly deep eyes and asked, "Why?" It was a simple question with a complex answer. Why had he stopped? Why had he given her his coat? Why was he kneeling on a dirty sidewalk instead of sitting in his climate-controlled office making million-dollar decisions? I don't know, he admitted, and it was the most honest thing he'd said in years. They looked at each other in silence, two people from completely different worlds suddenly occupying the same small space on a busy Seattle sidewalk. Around them, the city continued its relentless pace, but for Jackson, time seemed to have stopped entirely. I'm Amora, she said finally. Jackson. His name felt different on his tongue, stripped of the titles and qualifications that usually followed it. Not Jackson Pierce, CEO. Not Mr. Pierce, sir. Just Jackson. Jackson, she repeated, and he loved the way it sounded in her voice, soft and careful, like she was tasting something precious. Are you hungry? The question came out before he could stop it. Amora's eyes flickered with something, hope, maybe, or fear of hope. I don't want your charity. It's not charity, Jackson said, though he couldn't explain what it was. It's breakfast. Between two people who both look like they could use some coffee. She studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. Breakfast. Jackson stood and offered her his hand. When their fingers touched, he felt something electric pass between them, not just attraction, though that was there too, but recognition. As if his soul were saying, oh, there you are. I've been looking for you. Amora gathered her belongings, folding his coat carefully and trying to hand it back to him. But Jackson shook his head. Keep it. It looks better on you anyway. It was a lie. The coat was enormous on her small frame, but it was also the truth. Everything looked better on her because she made it real, made it matter in a way his expensive things never had. They walked together toward a small diner Jackson had never noticed before, despite walking past it countless times. Amora pulled her red suitcase behind her, its broken wheels scraping against the pavement in a rhythm that sounded like music to Jackson's ears. He didn't know her story yet. Didn't know about her grandmother or the nursing program or the dreams that had been buried under unpaid bills and impossible circumstances. Didn't know that she wrote poetry on napkins when she couldn't sleep, or that she had once saved a man's life with CPR she'd learned in class, or that she still believed in love even though life had given her every reason not to. All he knew was that 15 minutes ago, he had been Jackson Pierce, billionaire CEO, master of his universe and prisoner of his success. Now he was just a man walking beside a woman who had somehow managed to crack open his carefully constructed world with nothing more than the way she slept and the sound of her voice saying his name. Everything had changed. Everything. And for the first time in years, Jackson Pierce couldn't wait to see what happened next. The Bell Street Diner was the kind of place Jackson's world pretended didn't exist. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape, fluorescent lights that hummed like tired bees, and coffee that came in thick white mugs instead of bone china cups. But as he slid into the booth across from Amora, watching her wrap her small hands around her steaming mug like it was a lifeline, he couldn't remember ever being anywhere more perfect. You don't come to places like this often, do you? Amora asked, a hint of amusement in her voice as she watched him study the laminated menu. Jackson looked up, caught. That obvious. You're holding the menu like it might bite you. She smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. The exhaustion and weariness fell away, replaced by something radiant and alive. And you keep looking around like you're expecting someone to ask for your autograph. Do you know who I am? The question slipped out before he could stop it, and immediately he regretted asking. He sounded like every entitled rich man who ever lived. Amora's smile faltered slightly. Should I? No, Jackson said quickly. God, no. I'm not used to people not knowing. Well, I'm not most people. She took a sip of her coffee, wincing slightly at the heat. I've been a little disconnected from the news lately. No TV, no internet, no. She gestured vaguely, and Jackson understood. No home. The waitress appeared, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and sensible shoes. What can I get you folks? Pancakes, Amora said immediately, then caught herself. I mean, if that's okay. I can just have coffee. Pancakes, Jackson confirmed to the waitress. And eggs. And bacon. And toast. And orange juice. He looked at Amora. Anything else? You don't have to. I know I don't have to, Jackson said gently. I want to. After the waitress left, they sat in silence for a moment. The diner buzzed with conversation around them. Truckers arguing about the Seahawks, a mother trying to convince her toddler to eat his scrambled eggs, two elderly men solving the world's problems over endless refills. This is strange, Amora said finally. What is? This. You. Me. An hour ago I was sleeping on the street, and now I'm having breakfast with. She studied his face, taking in the expensive haircut, the perfectly pressed shirt, the watch that probably cost more than most people's cars. Who are you, Jackson? It was a fair question. The honest answer was complicated. Son of dead parents, builder of financial empires, collector of beautiful things he never had time to enjoy. But sitting across from this girl who slept on sidewalks and still worried about ruining his coat, all of that felt suddenly meaningless. I'm someone who's been living in a tower for so long, I forgot what the ground felt like, he said finally. Amora tilted her head, considering this. That sounds lonely. It is. The admission surprised him. He'd never said that out loud before, not even to himself. So what made you come down today? Jackson thought about the dream, about the little girl calling for her daddy, about the empty whiskey bottle and the board meeting he'd cancelled and the strange restlessness that had driven him out of his glass fortress. I don't know, he said. Maybe I was looking for something. Did you find it? Their eyes met across the chipped formica table, and Jackson felt that electric recognition again, the sense that this moment was rewriting the story of his life in ways he couldn't yet understand. I think so, he whispered. The food arrived, interrupting the intensity of the moment. Amora's eyes widened at the plate of golden pancakes, fluffy eggs, and crispy bacon. She picked up her fork with reverence, like she was handling something sacred. When did you last eat? Jackson asked, watching her take careful, measured bites as if she was afraid the food might disappear. Yesterday morning. The shelter serves breakfast, but I. She trailed off, clearly not wanting to explain about the 3-day limit, about being turned away with nowhere else to go. Jackson felt anger rise in his chest, not at her, but at a world that could let someone like this go hungry while he threw away more food than she'd seen in days. He thought about his penthouse kitchen, fully stocked with delicacies he never touched, and felt sick. What would you sacrifice to help someone you just met? Share your thoughts below. Tell me about yourself, he said, pushing down the rage that wouldn't help either of them. What did you do before? Before I became invisible. Amora finished with a wry smile. I was in nursing school. University of Washington. I was going to be a pediatric nurse. Was going to be. Amora set down her fork, her appetite seemingly gone despite having barely touched her food. My grandmother raised me. She was everything, my mother, my father, my best friend, my hero. She worked 3 jobs to pay for my school, never complained, never asked for anything in return. Jackson watched emotions play across her face, love, grief, guilt all tangled together. She had a stroke last December. Massive. The doctors said she probably didn't suffer, that it was quick. Amora's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly around her coffee mug. I took a leave from school to be with her, to take care of the arrangements, to try to figure out how to pay for everything. I'm sorry, Jackson said, and meant it. He knew what it was like to lose the people who mattered most. The medical bills were huge. Even with insurance, there were so many things not covered. I sold everything I could, her jewelry, her furniture, my textbooks. But it wasn't enough. I got behind on rent, then further behind, and then. She shrugged, trying to make it sound casual. Here I am. Can't you go back to school? Get financial aid. Amora's laugh was bitter. Have you ever tried to navigate the financial aid system when you're homeless? You need an address for everything, for applications, for mail, for verification. And I'm already thousands of dollars in debt from before. No bank is going to loan money to someone who sleeps on sidewalks. Jackson wanted to fix it, all of it. He could write a check right now that would pay off her debts, get her back in school, set her up in an apartment. It would be nothing to him, less than he spent on wine in a month. But something in her expression warned him off, a pride that he recognized because he'd worn it himself for so long. What about family? Friends? Grandma was all the family I had. And friends. Amora stirred her coffee absently. It's funny how quickly people disappear when you can't afford to go out anymore, when you can't return favors, when you become someone who needs help instead of someone who can give it. Jackson understood that too. His own circle was built on mutual benefit, business connections, social obligations, transactional relationships that would evaporate the moment his fortune did. That's not friendship, he said quietly. No, Amora agreed. It's not. But it's what I thought it was, and losing that illusion hurt almost as much as losing everything else. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the conversation having stripped away pretenses and left them both raw. Jackson found himself studying her, the way she savored each bite, the careful way she wiped her mouth, the unconscious grace in her movements despite her circumstances. Can I ask you something? Amora said eventually. Anything. Why are you here? Really. Not just the walking around part, but here with me. Men like you don't usually. She gestured between them. This doesn't happen in real life. Jackson set down his fork. It was a fair question, and she deserved an honest answer. The problem was, he wasn't sure he understood it himself. I've spent 15 years building walls, he said slowly. After my parents died, after I learned that people mostly want things from you rather than just wanting you, I decided it was safer to stay separate. Untouchable. Lonely, Amora said softly. Yes. But predictable. Controllable. Jackson looked out the diner window at the city beyond. This morning I woke up and realized I couldn't remember the last time I felt anything real. The last time someone surprised me, or made me laugh, or made me want to be better than I am. And you think I can do that? I think you already have. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Amora looked down at her hands, and Jackson wondered if he'd said too much, moved too fast. Jackson, she said carefully, I don't know what you think this is, but I need you to understand something. I have nothing to offer you. No money, no connections, no stability. I don't even have a place to live. Whatever fantasy you might be constructing about rescuing the poor girl and making her your project. That's not what this is, Jackson interrupted. Isn't it? Amora's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or hurt or both. Rich man find homeless girl, buys her breakfast, feels good about himself for a day, then goes back to his tower and forgets she exists. No. The word came out harder than Jackson intended. That's not what this is at all. Then what is it? Jackson stared at her across the table, this woman who had somehow reached into his chest and rearranged his entire world in the span of an hour. How could he explain that she made him want to be worthy of the way she looked at him? That her smile felt like coming home to a place he'd never been? That for the first time in his adult life, money felt meaningless compared to the possibility of mattering to someone who couldn't be bought? I don't know, he admitted. I just know that an hour ago, I was dying inside my perfect life, and now I feel alive. I know that you see me, not my money or my reputation or what I can do for you, just me. And I haven't felt seen in so long, I'd forgotten what it was like. Amora's expression softened slightly. Jackson. I know how this looks, he continued. I know how impossible it seems. Different worlds, different problems, different everything. But I also know that in 15 years of making smart decisions and profitable choices, I've never felt anything close to what I felt when you said my name. The diner seemed to fade around them, the conversations and clatter of dishes becoming background noise to the intensity building between them. Amora looked like she was fighting some internal battle, hope and fear warring in her expression. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Completely crazy," Jackson agreed. "You could have anyone. Someone from your world, someone who fits, someone who wouldn't complicate your life." "I don't want anyone else." "You don't even know me." "Then let me learn." Amora closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, Jackson saw tears threatening to spill over. "What if you don't like what you learn?" she asked. "What if I'm not the person you think I am? What if I disappoint you? What if you don't?" Jackson reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Her skin was soft and warm, and when she didn't pull away, he felt like he'd won something more valuable than all his business victories combined. What if this is exactly what we both need? And what if it destroys us both? It was a valid fear. Jackson's world was ruthless, full of people who would eat someone like Amora alive. The media, the social expectations, the sheer impossibility of bridging the gap between his penthouse and her suitcase, all of it was stacked against them. But looking at her now, feeling the way his heart hammered against his ribs just from touching her hand, Jackson realized he didn't care about any of that. "Then we'll be destroyed together," he said simply. Amora stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Sincerity, maybe, or proof that this wasn't just another game rich men played with disposable people. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because she turned her hand palm up beneath his and laced their fingers together. "This is insane," she said. "Absolutely insane," Jackson agreed, and smiled at her, the first real smile he'd worn in months. They sat there holding hands across a diner table, surrounded by the ordinary chaos of other people's ordinary lives, and Jackson felt like he was exactly where he belonged for the first time in years. But even as happiness bloomed in his chest, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered warnings. His world wouldn't accept her. Her pride wouldn't accept his help. The distance between penthouse and sidewalk was measured in more than just floors. It was measured in assumptions and expectations and the cruel mathematics of class warfare. Love might be enough in fairy tales, but in the real world, love had to survive lawyers and prenups and society columnists who would tear apart anyone who dared to reach above their station. Jackson pushed those thoughts away. Right now, in this moment, with Amora's hand warm in his and her smile lighting up his world, the future could wait. But the future, as it always did, was already making plans of its own. 3 days later, Jackson's life had become unrecognizable. He'd moved Amora into the penthouse guest suite at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, not his apartment, because he understood her need for independence, but somewhere safe and warm where she could sleep without fear. He'd bought her clothes that fit, taken her to dinners where the waiters knew his name, introduced her to a world of abundance she'd only glimpsed through storefront windows. But more than that, he'd discovered what it felt like to be truly known by another person. Amora saw through his carefully constructed facade with surgical precision. She noticed when he was tired behind his perfect posture, called him out when he was being condescending without meaning to, and made him laugh with observations about his world that were both devastating and true. "You have 17 types of mustard in your office kitchen," she'd said yesterday, exploring the executive floor of Pierce Financial while he finished a conference call. 17. But you eat lunch at your desk every day from the same boring place that delivers the same boring sandwich. "It's efficient," Jackson had protested. "It's sad," Amora had replied, and she'd been right. Now, sitting in his office on Thursday afternoon, Jackson found himself staring at his phone instead of the quarterly reports that demanded his attention. Amora was at the Seattle Art Museum, her first time in any museum, a fact that had made Jackson's chest tight with emotion when she'd admitted it. He'd wanted to go with her, to see her face when she encountered her first Monet, her first Picasso. but she'd insisted on going alone. "I need to remember who I am when I'm not with you," she'd said, and Jackson had understood even though it hurt. His desk phone rang. Rebecca's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Pierce? There's a Victoria Ashworth here to see you. She says it's urgent." Jackson's blood turned to ice. Victoria Ashworth, his ex-fiancée, the woman who'd left him 7 years ago because he was emotionally unavailable and married to his work. The woman who'd married Senator Richard Ashworth 6 months later and become Seattle's unofficial queen of high society. "Send her in," Jackson said, though every instinct told him to refuse. Victoria swept into his office like she owned it, all platinum blonde hair and surgical perfection wrapped in a designer dress that cost more than most people's cars. She'd always been beautiful in the way that money could buy, polished, maintained, flawless in the manner of expensive things. Looking at her now, Jackson marveled that he'd ever thought himself in love with her. She was everything Amora wasn't, cold where Amora was warm, calculated where Amora was genuine, empty where Amora was full of life. "Jackson," Victoria said, settling into the chair across from his desk like she belonged there. "You look well. Success suits you." "Victoria." Jackson kept his voice neutral. "What can I do for you?" "Oh, darling, it's not what you can do for me. It's what I can do for you." Victoria crossed her legs and smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm here to save you from making a terrible mistake." Jackson's hands clenched into fists beneath his desk. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't you?" Victoria pulled out her phone and swiped to a photo. This was taken yesterday at Carnley's. "You and your little charity case." The photo showed Jackson and Amora at dinner, her face animated as she told him some story, his expression soft with affection. Seeing it through Victoria's lens made Jackson's stomach turn, not because he was ashamed of Amora, but because he could already see how this would be twisted, weaponized, used to hurt someone who didn't deserve it. "Her name is Amora," Jackson said quietly. "I'm sure it is. What I'm also sure of is that you've lost your mind." Victoria leaned forward, her voice taking on the concerned tone she'd perfected during her husband's political campaigns. "Jackson, sweetheart, I understand the appeal. She's exotic, she's grateful, she makes you feel like a hero. But this isn't Pretty Woman, and you're not Richard Gere. Get out." The words came out low and dangerous. "I'm trying to help you," Victoria continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Do you have any idea what the media will do with this? What your board of directors will think? You're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, not some middle-aged crisis cliché picking up strays." Jackson stood slowly, his control hanging by a thread. "I said get out. The photos are already circulating, darling. By tomorrow, every society blog in the city will be running stories about Jackson Pierce and his homeless girlfriend. Is that really the legacy you want? Is she really worth destroying everything you've built?" Before Jackson could respond, the office door opened. Amora walked in, stopping short when she saw Victoria. Jackson's heart clenched as he watched Amora take in the other woman, the designer clothes, the perfect makeup, the unmistakable aura of wealth and privilege. "I'm sorry," Amora said quietly. "Rebecca said you were free, but I can come back later." "No," Jackson said quickly, moving around his desk toward her. "You don't need to leave." But Victoria was already standing, extending a manicured hand toward Amora with a smile that could have frozen hell. "You must be Amora," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I'm Victoria Ashworth. I was just telling Jackson how lovely it is that he's found someone special." Jackson watched Amora's face carefully. She was smart enough to hear the venom beneath Victoria's words, strong enough not to show how they affected her. "Nice to meet you," Amora said politely, shaking Victoria's hand briefly before stepping back toward Jackson. "I should go," Victoria said, gathering her purse. "But Jackson, think about what I said. Some mistakes can't be undone." After she left, the office fell into silence. Jackson could feel Amora processing what had just happened, could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. Ex-girlfriend? Amora asked finally. Ex-fiancé, Jackson corrected. A long time ago. She's beautiful. She's poison. Amora moved to the window, looking out at the city below. She's also right. About what? About the photos. About what people will think. About what this could do to your reputation. Amora turned to face him, and Jackson saw something in her expression that made his blood run cold. I've been naive, Jackson. Walking around in your world like I belong here, like love is enough to bridge the gap between us. Love is enough, Jackson said fiercely. Is it? Amora's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. When your board of directors starts questioning your judgment, when clients wonder if they can trust a CEO who makes decisions with his heart instead of his head, when every business meeting becomes about your personal life instead of your professional competence. Jackson wanted to argue, but the truth was, he'd been having the same fears. Not about loving Amora, that felt like the most rational thing he'd ever done, but about protecting her from the viciousness of his world, about shielding her from people like Victoria who would tear her apart for sport. I don't care what they think, he said. But I do. Amora's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. I care what they'll say about you. I care that loving me might cost you everything you've worked for. And I care that staying with you might cost me everything I've been trying to rebuild about myself. What would you choose? Love that could destroy everything you've worked for, or safety that might destroy your soul? Tell us your thoughts. What do you mean? Amora moved to his desk, picking up one of the business magazines that featured his picture on the cover. Do you see what's happening to me, Jackson? 3 days ago, I was sleeping on a suitcase, but I was still me. I was still fighting, still trying to figure out how to get my life back on my own terms. You still are. Am I? Amora's laugh was bitter. I'm staying in a hotel that costs more per night than I used to make in a month. I'm wearing clothes that cost more than my grandmother's monthly rent. I'm eating at restaurants where the wine costs more than some people's cars. I'm not fighting anymore, Jackson. I'm being kept. The word hit Jackson like a physical blow. That's not what this is. Isn't it? Be honest with yourself. What's the difference between me and every other beautiful woman who's ever been supported by a wealthy man? What makes this different from what your ex-fiancé thinks it is? Jackson wanted to shout that everything was different, that what they had was real and precious and unlike anything he'd ever experienced. But looking at Amora's face, seeing the pain and confusion and growing desperation there, he realized she was fighting something deeper than Victoria's poisonous words. She was fighting the fear that she was losing herself. You think I'm trying to change you, Jackson said quietly. I think you're trying to save me, Amora replied. And I'm grateful. God knows I'm grateful. But Jackson, I can't be saved by someone else. I have to save myself, or I'll never really be saved at all. The truth of her words hit Jackson like a punch to the gut. He thought about the last 3 days, how he'd solved her problems with money, how he'd surrounded her with comfort and luxury, how he'd tried to fix her life instead of helping her fix it herself. He'd done exactly what she was accusing him of. He'd tried to be her savior instead of her partner. What are you saying? Jackson asked, though he was afraid he already knew. Amora moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to smell the shampoo she'd used that morning, expensive shampoo he'd bought for her because her old bottle was nearly empty. I'm saying I need to go, she whispered. No. The word came out harsh, desperate. Amora, no. We can figure this out. We can find a way to make this work. How? Her voice broke slightly. Tell me how, Jackson. How do we make this work when your world will never accept me as I am? When your ex-fiancé can walk into your office and make me feel like a fraud with just a look? When every day I spend with you takes me further away from the person I was trying to become. Jackson cupped her face in his hands, feeling tears on her cheeks that broke his heart. Because I love you, he said desperately. Because you make me better. Because you make me want to be worthy of you. And I love you too, Amora whispered, the words he'd been longing to hear delivered like a knife to his chest. I love you so much it terrifies me. But Jackson, love isn't enough if it destroys us both in the process. It won't destroy us. Won't it? Amora pulled back from his touch. Look at what's already happening. You're questioning every business decision based on how it might affect me. I'm losing sight of who I am beneath all the things you've given me. Victoria was right about one thing. This isn't a fairy tale. This is real life, with real consequences, and real people who can be really hurt. Jackson felt something breaking inside his chest, something fundamental and irreparable. So what are you saying? That we just give up? That we walk away from something that could be extraordinary because other people might not understand it? I'm saying that maybe extraordinary isn't enough if it comes at the cost of everything else. Amora's voice was barely a whisper now. I'm saying that maybe the bravest thing we can do is admit that love sometimes means letting go. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Jackson stared at this woman who had walked into his life 3 days ago and changed everything, who had made him believe in possibilities he'd forgotten existed, who was now preparing to walk away for reasons that made terrible, perfect sense. Don't do this, he pleaded. Please, Amora. Don't do this. But even as he said the words, Jackson could see the decision solidifying in her eyes. She was pulling away from him, rebuilding the walls that 3 days of love had torn down. I have to, she said simply. For both of us. Amora moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back to him. Jackson. Yeah. Thank you for seeing me. For 3 days, you made me feel like I mattered. Like I was worth something. I'll never forget that. And then she was gone, leaving Jackson alone in his glass tower with the taste of goodbye bitter on his tongue and the sound of his heart breaking echoing off the walls. He stood there for a long time, staring at the door she'd walked through, feeling the weight of his empty office pressing down on him like a physical thing. Outside his windows, Seattle went about its business, oblivious to the fact that the most important thing in Jackson Pierce's life had just walked away. For the first time in years, Jackson Pierce, master of the universe, king of his empire, had no idea what to do next. But somewhere deep in the part of his heart that Amora had awakened, a small voice whispered that this wasn't over. Couldn't be over. Not when they'd found something worth fighting for. The question was, would either of them be brave enough to fight? 2 weeks after Amora walked out of his office, Jackson Pierce looked like a man who'd forgotten how to sleep. He'd thrown himself back into work with the kind of desperate intensity that his employees whispered about in hallways. 18-hour days, impossible demands, a coldness that made even his most hardened executives flinch. The business press had started calling it his return to form, but Rebecca knew better. She'd worked for Jackson long enough to recognize the difference between focused ambition and a man trying to outrun his own heart. Sir. Rebecca knocked on his office door at 9 p.m. on a Friday, knowing he'd still be there. The quarterly reports you requested. Jackson looked up from his desk, and Rebecca was startled by how hollow his eyes looked. In 2 weeks, he'd aged years. Thank you, he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. Since Amora left, Jackson rarely spoke unless absolutely necessary. Mr. Pierce, if you don't mind me saying. I do mind, Jackson cut her off, but not unkindly. Good night, Rebecca. Rebecca hesitated at the door. She's at the YWCA on 3rd Avenue, she said quietly. In case you were wondering. Jackson's hand stilled on the papers he was pretending to read. I didn't ask. No, sir, you didn't. But I thought you should know that she's working there now. Volunteer coordinator. And she's enrolled in night classes at Seattle Central College. Trying to finish her nursing degree. Rebecca left before Jackson could respond, but she saw the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking. After she was gone, Jackson sat alone in his glass tower, staring out at the city lights that had once made him feel like a king. Now they just reminded him of stars, beautiful, distant, and impossible to touch. Amora was building a life without him. The thought should have made him proud, and part of him was proud. She was doing exactly what she'd said she needed to do, saving herself. But the selfish part of him, the part that had tasted happiness for 3 perfect days, wanted to storm down to the YWCA and fight for what they'd had. The part that loved her knew he couldn't. If he'd learned anything in the past 2 weeks, it was that Amora had been right about everything. Love wasn't enough if it came at the cost of who you were. And Jackson had been trying to make her into someone who could fit his world instead of questioning whether his world was worth fitting into. Jackson pulled out his phone and stared at Amora's contact information. He'd typed a dozen messages and deleted them all. What was there to say? That he missed her. That his penthouse felt like a mausoleum without her laughter echoing through it. That he'd give up everything he'd built for one more morning of waking up to her smile. All of that was true, but none of it was what she needed to hear. What she needed, what she'd been trying to tell him from the beginning, was that she had value beyond what he could give her. That she was worth fighting for, not because she needed saving, but because she was extraordinary exactly as she was. Jackson set down his phone and opened his laptop. If he couldn't win her back with words, maybe he could win her back with actions. The YWCA on 3rd Avenue was nothing like the gleaming towers of Jackson's world. The building was old, functional, filled with women who'd learned that survival was an art form requiring both courage and creativity. Amora had found her place here among the volunteers and staff who understood what it meant to rebuild your life from nothing. "Amora, we need you in conference room B," called Linda, the director. "There's a group of potential donors here, and you're better at explaining our programs than I am." Amora looked up from the registration forms she was organizing. In 2 weeks at the YWCA, she'd discovered something she'd forgotten during her time in Jackson's world. She was good at this. Good at helping people navigate systems, good at listening to their stories, good at helping them find resources and hope in equal measure. What kind of donors? Amora asked, smoothing down her simple black dress, one of the few pieces she'd kept from Jackson's gifts, though she'd had it altered to fit properly. Corporate types. Some foundation that wants to fund job training programs. Linda handed her a folder. Just be yourself. Tell them what we do here and why it matters. Amora walked into conference room B and stopped short. At the head of the table sat a woman she didn't recognize, elegant, professional, probably in her 50s. But at the far end of the table, looking as surprised to see her as she was to see him, sat Jackson. He looked terrible. Thin, exhausted, like he'd been living on coffee and regret for weeks. But he also looked different somehow. Less armored. More human. "Ms. Johnson," the woman said, standing and extending her hand. "I'm Catherine Morrison from the Pierce Foundation. Thank you for meeting with us." The Pierce Foundation. Amora's eyes snapped to Jackson, who was studying his hands like they held the secrets of the universe. "I'll be honest," Catherine continued. "We're considering a significant investment in job training and educational support programs for women in transition. Mr. Pierce suggested we start by learning from the organizations that are already doing this work effectively." Amora found her voice. That's wonderful. We can definitely use the support." For the next hour, Amora walked the small group through the YWCA's programs, the job training workshops, the childcare assistance, the emergency housing program, the life skills classes that helped women rebuild not just their finances but their confidence. She spoke passionately about the women she'd met, single mothers trying to finish their education, women escaping domestic violence who needed both shelter and job skills, older women who'd lost everything in economic downturns and were trying to start over. Jackson didn't speak during the entire presentation, but Amora could feel his attention like a physical weight. When she looked at him, she saw something in his expression that she'd never seen before, Not just love or desire, but respect. Professional respect for the work she was doing, for the person she was becoming. "This is impressive," Catherine said when Amora finished. "The outcomes you're describing, the success rates, they're exactly what we're looking for in a partner organization." "How much funding are we talking about?" Linda asked. Catherine exchanged a glance with Jackson, who nodded slightly. $2 million over 3 years, with the possibility of renewal based on results. The room fell silent. Amora felt her heart stop. $2 million would transform everything. They could expand their programs, hire more staff, help hundreds more women than they currently could. That's... Linda started, then stopped, seemingly overwhelmed. "There is one condition," Catherine continued. "The Foundation wants to ensure proper oversight of such a significant investment. We'd like to place a representative on your board of directors, someone who understands both the financial and operational aspects of running effective programs." "Of course," Linda said immediately. "We'd welcome that kind of partnership." Catherine smiled. "Excellent. Ms. Johnson, would you be interested in the position?" Amora blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "We'd like you to serve as the Pierce Foundation's representative on the YWCA board. The position comes with a substantial salary, enough to allow you to complete your nursing degree while maintaining your work here. You'd essentially be liaising between our foundation and organizations like this one throughout the Pacific Northwest." Amora looked at Jackson, understanding flooding through her. This wasn't charity. This wasn't him trying to save her or buy her back. This was him recognizing what she could do, what she was good at, and creating a way for her to do it without compromising her independence. I need to think about it," Amora said carefully. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Catherine gathered her papers. "I think that covers everything for today. Linda, we'll have contracts drawn up based on our discussion. Ms. Johnson, I hope you'll consider our offer seriously. Mr. Pierce speaks very highly of your capabilities." After the Foundation representatives left, Amora found herself alone with Linda, who was still staring at the conference table like it might disappear if she looked away. $2 million, Linda said faintly. "Amora, do you realize what this means?" Amora did realize, and it terrified her. Not the money. The money was wonderful, would help so many people who desperately needed it. What terrified her was the way Jackson had looked at her during the presentation. Like he was seeing her clearly for the first time, not as someone who needed rescuing but as someone who was already doing the rescuing. "Linda, I need to step out for a few minutes," Amora said. "Of course, honey. Take all the time you need." Amora found Jackson in the lobby, standing by the windows and looking out at the street where she'd first been sleeping 2 weeks ago. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "That was quite a presentation," he said quietly. "That was quite an offer." Amora crossed her arms, not quite trusting herself to stand too close to him. $2 million, Jackson. Really? It's not about the money. Isn't it? Rich man loses the girl, so he throws money at her organization to win her back. Jackson's jaw tightened. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Amora moved closer to him, close enough to see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. "Talk to me. Help me understand what's happening here." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. 2 weeks ago, you told me that love wasn't enough if it destroyed who we were. You were right. I was. You were right about everything. I was trying to save you instead of supporting you. I was trying to make you fit my world instead of questioning whether my world was worth fitting into. Jackson turned to face her fully. So I started asking different questions. Instead of how can I fix Amora's problems, I started asking how can I use what I have to amplify what Amora's already doing. Instead of how can I make her need me, I started asking how can I help her not need anyone. Amora felt tears pricking at her eyes. And the answer was a job offer. The answer was recognizing that you don't need to be saved, Amora. You're already saving other people. You're already changing lives. You're already exactly who you were meant to be. Jackson's voice was soft but certain. The job offer is just me acknowledging that and trying to get out of your way. Get out of my way. The foundation board position is real. Catherine Morrison is real. She's been running charitable foundations for 20 years, and she's brilliant at it. The salary is competitive for the work you'd be doing. The money for the YWCA isn't contingent on your decision about the job, and it's not contingent on anything happening between us. Amora stared at him, processing this. You're saying you'd give the YWCA $2 million even if I told you I never wanted to see you again? Yes. Why? Jackson stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. Because the work you're doing here matters. Because women like you, women like the ones you're helping, deserve every advantage I can give them. And because loving you means wanting you to succeed even if that success has nothing to do with me. Have you ever loved someone enough to want their happiness more than your own? Share your story in the comments. Amora felt something breaking open in her chest, not breaking apart, but breaking open like a flower blooming. What about us? She whispered. What about us? Is this your way of saying goodbye? Of making sure I'm taken care of before you move on? Jackson's expression grew pained. Amora, if you take this job, you'll be traveling throughout the Pacific Northwest, working with organizations in small towns and big cities, building programs and changing lives. You'll be too busy and too important to worry about what some CEO in Seattle thinks about you. That's not what I asked. Jackson cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. You asked what this is about. This is about me learning to love you the way you deserve to be loved, without conditions, without trying to change you, without needing you to be anything other than exactly who you are. And what if who I am is someone who loves you back? Then I'm the luckiest man alive, Jackson said simply. But I need you to choose me because you want to, not because you need to. I need you to choose me from a position of strength, not dependency. Amora looked into his eyes and saw something she'd never seen before in any man's face, complete and total acceptance. He wasn't trying to convince her or manipulate her or win her back with grand gestures. He was simply offering her everything she needed to build the life she wanted, with no strings attached. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her. You beautiful, impossible man, she whispered. Don't you understand? Understand what? I already chose you. I chose you the moment you knelt down beside me on that sidewalk. I chose you when you bought me breakfast and listened to my story. I chose you when you looked at me like I mattered. Then why did you leave? Because I was scared. Because I thought loving you meant losing myself. Because I didn't understand the difference between being saved and being supported. Jackson's hands were shaking against her face. And now I understand that you're not trying to save me. You're trying to help me save myself and everyone else I can reach. Amora smiled through her tears. Now I understand that the right kind of love doesn't make you smaller, it makes you bigger than you ever thought you could be. Amora. I love you, Jackson Pierce. I love your ridiculous tower and your 17 types of mustard and the way you look at the world like you can fix it with enough determination and the right spreadsheet. Jackson laughed, the sound raw with emotion. I love you too. I love your strength and your compassion and the way you see good in people even when they can't see it in themselves. So what happens now? Jackson kissed her forehead, soft and reverent. Now you take the job, if you want it. Now you finish your nursing degree and change the world one person at a time. Now you build the life you were meant to have. With you. If you'll have me. Not as your savior or your keeper, but as your partner. as someone who loves you enough to get out of your way when you need space and fight beside you when you need an ally. Amora stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, pouring 2 weeks of longing and fear and hope into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "I'll take the job," she said. "Good. Catherine's right, you'll be brilliant at it. On one condition." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Next time you want to make a grand romantic gesture, maybe lead with a conversation instead of a corporate foundation." Jackson laughed, the sound lighter than anything Amora had heard from him in weeks. "Deal. Though I should warn you, I'm still learning how to do this." "Do what?" "Love someone without trying to control the outcome." Amora took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Lucky for you, I'm a good teacher." They walked out of the YWCA together, back into the Seattle afternoon that had brought them together 3 weeks ago. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain in its details but solid in its foundation. Amora would take the job with the Pierce Foundation, would finish a nursing degree, would spend her days helping women build lives of strength and independence. Jackson would learn to support her dreams instead of trying to direct them, would discover that love was less about possession and more about partnership, would find that his money meant more when it was used to amplify good rather than accumulate power. They would face challenges, the media attention that came with their relationship, the social pressures of bridging different worlds, the normal struggles of two strong-willed people learning to build a life together. But they would face them as equals, as partners, as two people who had learned that the best kind of love doesn't complete you, it helps you complete yourself. 6 months later, Amora would graduate with her nursing degree, summa cum laude. A year later, she would accept Jackson's proposal, not in a fancy restaurant or a private jet, but in the same YWCA conference room where he'd first seen her as a professional rather than a project. 2 years later, they would open the first Amora Johnson Center for Women's Independence, funded by the Pierce Foundation but guided by Amora's vision of what help should look like, temporary, respectful, designed to build strength rather than dependence. But all of that was still in the future. For now, they walked hand in hand through the streets of Seattle, two people who had found in each other not completion, but expansion. Not salvation, but the courage to save themselves. And that, Amora thought as Jackson squeezed her hand and smiled at her like she was the best thing that had ever happened to him, was exactly what love was supposed to feel like. "So," Jackson said as they reached the corner where they'd first met, "what do you want to do now?" Amora looked around at the city that had tested them both, that had broken them down and built them back up stronger. She thought about the women at the YWCA who would benefit from Jackson's foundation, about the nursing degree she would finish, about the life they would build together based on mutual respect rather than mutual need. "Now," she said, "we go home." "Your place or mine?" Amora grinned. "How about we find our place?" And together, they walked into their future, not as a savior and the saved, but as two equals who had learned that the best love stories aren't about one person rescuing another. They're about two people choosing, every day, to be worthy of the love they've been given. Love isn't about saving someone, it's about supporting them as they save themselves. What's the difference between helping and controlling in your relationships? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.